Our great nation is now living in an unprecedented moment. We're facing the worst public health crisis in 100 years and the worst economic collapse since the Great Depression. We are confronting systemic racism and the enormous threat to our planet of climate change. And in the midst of all of this, we have a president who is not only incapable of addressing these crises, but is leading us down the path of authoritarianism. This election is the most important in the modern history of this country. In response to the unprecedented crises we face, we need an unprecedented response, a movement like never before, of people who are prepared to stand up and fight for democracy and decency and against greed, oligarchy, and bigotry. And we need Joe Biden as our next president. But let us be clear. If Donald Trump is reelected, all the progress we have made will be in jeopardy. At its most basic, this election is about preserving our democracy. During this president's term, the unthinkable has become normal. He has tried to prevent people from voting, undermined the U.S. Postal Service, deployed the military and federal agents against peaceful protesters, threatened to delay the election, and suggested that he will not leave office if he loses. This is not normal, and we must never treat it like it is. Under this administration, authoritarianism has taken root in our country. I and my family, and many of yours, know the insidious way authoritarianism destroys democracy, decency, and humanity. As long as I am here, I will work with progressives, with moderates, and yes, with conservatives to preserve this nation from a threat that so many of our heroes fought and died to defeat.
That was a brutal day. That was a brutal day.
This week,
in fact, there was a video before that where Bernie Sanders basically came out with Joe Biden and said, "I'm with Joe." Now, those days, it's something like, when he came out for Hillary Clinton at that particular point. Those days for lefties are painful. Those are the days where Sanders basically capitulates, gives in, bends the knee, raises the hand. I'm in it with you, Joe. I'm in it with you, Hillary. And the thing is, when capitulating for Joe Biden, this was in the middle of COVID and everything else, which basically sapped all of the energy out of the presidential campaign. Joe Biden didn't even have all of his debates with Trump. It was somewhat of a weird cycle. The thing is, my contention in this was that Sanders had the ability and the potential to get more out of it. Now, that would have meant this kind of unbridled conflict where you were basically using your voters to leverage things out of the candidate. Now, whether that worked or not, it was probably the most aggressive position a person could take in that particular position. That was my thought. By the same token, though, Sanders is not that guy. And not just not that guy. He was able to get something out of it. Sanders got the budget committee seat, meaning he was the chair of the budget committee. The chair of the budget committee has a superpower. That superpower is shepherding budget reconciliation. By budgeting or shepherding budget reconciliation, Sanders is at a perch that allows him to basically, let's say, navigate the way money moves through Congress, especially from the standpoint of appropriation to bills. Now, with Biden winning presidency, Sanders takes that particular perch, and Sanders becomes a behemoth and starts screaming about the things that he wants the budget for. And in screaming about the things he wants the budget for, well, you have Biden, who for most part had been a centrist president. But the context of our world has been shaped by Sanders. Despite him losing to Clinton, despite him losing to Biden, the context and the framework to which we look at our world on some level has been shaped by Sanders. When they were in the debates, what was it? Medicare for all. What was it? Free college. What was it? Are we going to expand Social Security, et cetera, $15 an hour minimum wage? All of those things became an argument, meaning the window has shifted to such a degree where things that were in the Obama administration that wasn't even on the table, not just became on the table, but became, from the opinion of the public, favorites. And not just from the opinion of the public, favorites. What centrists had to argue against. Meaning the world that we're living in right now, when Biden ran that campaign, Biden had to run on some level farther to the left than anybody would have expected Biden to run. On some level, he didn't have a choice because Sanders had basically dragged him that far to the left. For those people who say Sanders got nothing accomplished, I've continued to say that those people are insane. You may take that ideological framing and you may say that to other people who just kind of banter that stuff back at you. But in real terms, reality doesn't care about your ideology. And in this very specific instance, Sanders continues, even after the losses, to get things accomplished. And it's not just the specifics of the politics. It's also the overarching context that his run had set. And it set that going forward. Now, when Biden gets in office, Biden basically takes this lefty framing, despite the fact that he wasn't necessarily getting things done. He did roll back things from Trump and everything else, but it is on some level telling that when Biden got in office, he felt that he had to basically say, well, we're going to do this package and we're going to do that package. And then people start whispering, FDR, all of that nonsense. But the real truth of it is, Biden did look at this on some level as a contest, weird, with China. And that in the context of this context with China, he has to invest in America. Now, part of that was the child care program that was passed in the other one, the $1,400. But again, Donald Trump was going to pass a bill that Nancy Pelosi basically held up. So yes, tepid applause that Biden passed a plan on Democratic Party line. But again, Trump was going to pass the same thing or something similar. The thing becomes, what is Biden going to pass? And if Biden doesn't pass anything, you're going to have problems. Now, Biden says he wants an infrastructure plan, but Biden had also said he wants $15 an hour minimum wage. He also said he wants the PRO Act, but he was willing to let that stuff die on the vine, despite he continues to say it constantly. And so you can't really take what Biden says as any kind of indicator of what Biden is going to do. He also said marijuana. I don't necessarily see weed legalized yet, or for that matter, the records expunged or changed to scheduling. I don't see any of that stuff. And the president has the capacity to do it. So no, I don't necessarily take Biden as being honest when he is putting forward programs. The $15 an hour was a canary in the coal mine that he basically strangled to death. From the standpoint, however, of Sanders, chair of the budget committee, Sanders says, I want an infrastructure package for $6 trillion. $6 trillion with a T. And people said Sanders has lost his mind. He's finally have lost it. He's gone. The thing is, if you ever notice, when Republicans are arguing and they're trying to, let's say, get a policy or they're trying to debate or whatever else, you would say, I want $1 billion for this program. And Republicans would say, no, you only need $500. Now, the $500 is so ludicrous, but it's so ludicrous that it forces, if you're trying to meet somewhere in the middle, well, if they're starting at $500, you're going to end up in this kind of ridiculous middle. Sanders, on some level, employs the same tactic. I want $6 trillion. Now, he would want $6 trillion. Don't misunderstand me. If he could get it out of you, he will. He's a shrewd negotiator in regards to the politics of it all. But he will settle for less. But the fact that he wanted 6 pushes the line of argumentation further up. It's a negotiating tactic on some level, but it's somewhat of an effective one. Same thing with Medicare for all. I want Medicare for all. I want this, and you stack up all the things that you want. Now, will he be able to get the exact thing? Maybe. Would he want it? Yes. Would he settle for, let's say, a public option that basically does most of what he wants? Yes. He's pragmatic. I get that people cast him as this radical, but at the end of the day, when you talk to people who actually know Sanders and who have negotiated with him, he would negotiate with Republicans, moderates, anybody to basically get his agenda accomplished. And he's somewhat pragmatic in the way that he does it. The point that I'm trying to make is 2 points. One, from the larger context that was set basically by Sanders' 2 runs, this context that if you look at what was taking place in 2008 when Obama ran, when Obama had a mandate, versus the context of now, where things like Medicare for all and $15 an hour minimum wage and expansion of Social Security, those things are basically typical, normal political discourse and are on the table for debate and, in many respects, on the table as a goal to shoot for, even in our current politics. 2008, all of that stuff was off the table. The point that I'm making here is for people who are saying, oh, he didn't get anything accomplished, I think you've missed the Overton window shifting around you. That, in and of itself, is getting something accomplished, even if you didn't necessarily get the law. You got the, let's say, the underpinnings. From the standpoint of now, though, Sanders, wanting $6 trillion, ends up getting basically $4.1 trillion. Now, this is in 2 parts, and this is somewhat shaky. Right here. They just came out today with this. They're going to do $3.5 trillion for the infrastructure package, and they're going to go it alone by themselves. There's $600 billion for the bipartisan infrastructure package. So they're doing this in 2 tracks, and it sounds strange, but they're doing it in 2 ways. Joe Biden is working with 10 Republicans in order to pass the infrastructure package because in order to overcome the filibuster, you would need 60 votes. And so the 10 Republicans will give him the 60 votes. Now, this infrastructure package is his bipartisan push, which is going to be about $600 billion. On the other track, you have Democrats pushing for $3.5 trillion, where they basically stuffed all sorts of stuff in it that they're calling human infrastructure and brick and mortar infrastructure. What they couldn't get in one, they basically put in the other. This is going to use budget reconciliation. And because it's going to use budget reconciliation, there are all sorts of rules that have to go along with that, including the parliamentarian allowing it. Yes, the parliamentarian can get knocked out of the way, but they didn't do it the last time around, so there's no reason to expect them to do it this time around. So, total bills together, 4.1 trillion. There are all sorts of caveats in this. All sorts of caveats. But Sanders was the mastermind of this. He's been the MVP of this. And he is going to be the one to shepherd this through Congress. Well, the Senate, anyway, to make this work. I will bring to you that despite those hard days, he keeps surviving and allows days like this.
For a very long time, the American people have seen the very rich getting richer and government developing policies which allow them to pay, in some cases, not a nickel in federal income taxes. They've seen corporations make huge profits. In some cases, they're not paying a nickel in taxes. And what this legislation says, among many, many other things, that those days are gone. The wealthy and large corporations are going to start paying their fair share of taxes so that we can protect the working families of this country.
Now, the catch becomes, because I said there were catches, how's that going to be paid for? And that's a sticking point. Now, because there are 2 bills, right? The bipartisan bill, they put off how they're going to pay for it until later. Now, Republicans would like to raise gas tax. Democrats said that's off the table. If you remember, the gas tax raising is what caused the Yellow Vest movement in France, among other things. And those protests have went on for God knows how long. It's funny how they really didn't necessarily cover the Yellow Vest protests, despite the fact that those protests were massive, had 75% support among the population, and the government wouldn't leave. The Macron government would leave. And yet, you have a few people protesting in Cuba, big in comparison to what they typically have as protests. And all of a sudden, the U.S. is like, the Cuban government needs to leave, and they're covering it on every page and everything else. It'd be more obvious. So, but in this case, so the 10 Republicans are going to have to agree on how to pay for it. That's the first point. Meaning, it's possible that the $600 billion deal falls apart in the end because of payment. Republicans are not necessarily going to agree with tax cuts or the increases in taxes that the Democrats are going to want to make in order to pay for the plan. Democrats, in this case, are going to want to increase taxes. Republicans, like I said, want to increase gas tax. They're going to have to figure out some kind of way to make that work. Otherwise, this deal is going to hit the skids. There's this other situation with the $3.5 trillion bill, despite that being a separate bill from the other infrastructure bill. It's on its own track, separate bill, $3.5 trillion. The Republicans may take issue with the fact that the Democrats are doing that on its own without their support. They would say, you're ramming this through Congress. And they are, and I applaud them for doing it. If you're not going to get on board, get out the way. That's the way I look at it with this. This is for the American public. Do it so. And so they may say, because you're ramming this through, we don't want to support this plan now. They may even say, because you're ramming this through, we're going to be dicks about funding this particular plan. It's kind of hard to know where that's going to go. So this plan is not necessarily settled. There's all sorts of stuff that is not necessarily settled. It's unclear what can be entirely put through from the standpoint of the budget reconciliation process. But there's some good stuff in this. That's why I applaud this. And this is kind of my point about Sanders. He has been pushing and fighting behind the scenes to get the maximum out of this that he could get. Keep in mind, Sanders was the one that wanted to fire the parliamentarian in order to basically push through $15 an hour. It's Biden that wouldn't go through with that. And so Sanders, despite the losses, despite the bruises, he has still been fighting and has not given up fighting, talking about waking up, going to bed, thinking of the same thing. How can I deliver for the American public? And Sanders, in this moment, does. Whatever my thoughts of about the Biden administration or about this presidency and what this presidency could be versus what this presidency is and what this Congress can be versus what this Congress is, I will never sit here and say delivering $4.1 trillion for the American public is a bad thing. The devil is always in the details, and it depends on what is going to be in this bill, whether it's going to be a giveaway, whether it's going to be, or whether it's going to actually be tailored to the public. There was a want for there to be a bias towards unions in the bill from the standpoint of the way the bill was spent, and I'll just read it. Masterminded by Senator Bernie Sanders, chairman of the Budget Committee, the public blueprint is expected as early as this week, setting an ambitious spending ceiling for passing the dream policies that won't make it any bipartisan infrastructure package. Democrats will only get one crack at it. Every Democrat has to be on board, which means they still have to get Manchin, Semina on board for this particular plan. You had John Warner, you had Warner coming out sounding more like Sanders, saying that this is our moment, this is the moment where this needs to take place, et cetera, et cetera. You have Biden who's saying this is the moment, et cetera, et cetera. And more likely than not, Biden would sign it. The hindrance here isn't necessarily Biden. The hindrance here would be the other bipartisan bill, which even though they say it's separate, the Republicans may balk at, which may, if that falls apart, they will probably try to add some of that stuff to this, in which case they go it alone. But then you have the Mansions of the world, on whether or not they'll go along with it. Meaning Democrats could run with this solo, but Biden wants to have a bipartisan push where he can say, I told you I was bipartisan in this. The core of the package, right here. The core of the package is expected to deliver on parts of Biden 1.8 trillion families plan, 2.3 trillion jobs proposal that don't get included in a separate bipartisan deal, including the presidential's pitch for universal pre-kindergarten, 2 years of free community college, extending the expanded child tax credit, creating a paid family and medical leave plan. But there are a lot of other items that he wants to add to it. But that's in and of itself is quite good. 2-year free college, extended expanded child tax credit, creating a paid family and medical leave program. Right here. Free pre-K. Free schools, meals for all. Lefties wanted this package to support free meals in public schools, including breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks for all kids, no matter their family income. Tax breaks. These are policies that they want in the plan, but may not end up in them in the end. Biden's social infrastructure plan also calls for extending Democratic recent expansion of child tax credit, earned income tax credit, and tax breaks subsidizing child care expenses. Democrats are expecting to throw in a new perk for renewable energy as well. Cheaper prescriptions. Progressives are rooting for policies that lower prescription drug prices. Congressional Democrats is divided on how to make that happen. Immigration reform. Democrats want to include a pathway to citizenship. That probably is not going to be something that is allowed. Greener farming. Senator Agriculture Debbie Stabenow is pushing to include more money for climate-friendly farm practices in the final package, including conservation programs. Biden infrastructure blueprint called for $1 billion over the next 5 years to help agriculture industry shift towards net zero greenhouse gas emissions. Amount Stabenow calls woefully inadequate. Closing the digital divide. Ideas for bringing the internet service to more corners of the country could potentially make it into the final bill. Democrats want local governments to own and operate their own internet networks. So do I. There are laws against that in the various places, basically allowing internet service providers to run roughshod. Union contracts. Biden and congressional Democrats have pushed for any new infrastructure investment to come with requirements that contractors work with unions and pay prevailing wages, quote unquote, which the Labor Department set as the going rate for certain jobs in different areas of the country. I mean, basically, if you have a situation where you can say, okay, if you want to get a contract associated with this, then you need to pay your workers X and or be associated with a particular union contract. I mean, it's somewhat of a way of forcing wages at a certain level. You know, a better way to force wages at a certain level, pass $15 an hour, fire the parliamentarian if she gets in the way. That's the way to do it. And even Manchin supports that one. Right here, Medicaid gap fix. A dozen states still refuse to expand Medicaid and Medicare. Democrats want to use their plan to circumvent that by delivering health insurance coverage to millions of Americans in those holdout states. So one of the other items, this one, is basically people who don't have access to Medicaid because Republicans won't expand it. Well, Democrats want to basically give those people Medicaid. They want to expand it. That's what I mean. This is $4.1 trillion, if they can get it over the counter, will be damn strong as a pitch for the midterms. Clean energy perks. Manchin's chair of the Energy Committee and crucial vote for Democratic agenda has floated an $8 billion tax credit that would attract clean energy manufacturing and recycling companies to areas with significant unemployment. Again, a good idea. You have an area that has unemployment. Okay, we have a lot of unemployed people there. That means they're going to be an incentive towards crime, an incentive towards poverty, homelessness, etc., etc. I have an idea. Let's get jobs into the area with unemployed people. Hey, how can we do that? Well, we're the government. Let's incentivize people and companies to go to those areas by giving cash. And they go to those areas. Now, there has to be protections on this. So you have to ensure that they actually do hire, etc., etc., etc. But that's the catch. I mean, the devil is always in the details on that stuff. And if it works, however, yes, If it doesn't, you've basically just given away money to a corporation that screwed over and didn't necessarily do what they said they were going to do. You need, like, I don't know, like a watchman who watches the watchman, I suppose. But in principle, not bad. Here's another one, workers' protections. A top priority for organized labor is including a bill that will make it easier for workers to form unions and extend collective bargaining rights to independent contractors. Again, I don't see how a lot of this stuff will get into the bill only because of what it is. It may not fall under budget reconciliation. Medicare expansion. Progressive Democrats are pushing for two major changes to Medicare as part of the partisan plan, lowering the eligibility age and adding coverage for dental, vision, and hearing care. That's big. That's so big. Understand what that means. So if Sanders wasn't able to get Medicare for all, okay. So his thought is, okay, well, maybe what I can do is expand the number of people that can have access to Medicare by lowering the age of Medicare and getting the dental, the vision that I wanted anyway. Because the changes that Sanders wanted to make in the Medicare for All bill was to include dental and vision, which is a huge loophole. Now, as somebody who's on Medicare pays 80%, but Medicare does not pay for prescriptions. It doesn't pay for dental. It doesn't pay for vision. Those are separate things. And so elderly people who end up on it have to also find some other insurance to cover that, some kind of adjunct insurance. This will basically allow Medicare to cover it all, which is that's an amazing thing. This is why I say he's the MVP of this. He didn't just go home. He didn't just consider himself an ideological actor where it was all or nothing. I accept this or there's nothing else. He continued to work and advocate for the things that he wanted. And in this very specific instance, he's basically expanding the number of people who's eligible for Medicare. Is it Medicare for all? No. Is it Medicare for a hell of a lot more people that wouldn't be eligible for, and expanding for all of those people that have Medicare now, dental and vision? The answer is yes. Is that astonishingly good? The answer is also yes. The answer is yes. The question is, can they pass it? That is trickier. I mean, depending upon the budget reconciliation stuff, it depends on whether Semina and Manchin and some of the other conservative Democrats, basically Republicans, will stay online. It depends on whether Republicans will stay online from the standpoint of the coalition of 10 idiots that they ended up bringing together. There's a lot of ifs and buts. But the thing is that if they do pass it, and if they can shepherd it through, Sanders gets a hell of a lot of credit for getting this passed. And especially the Medicare portion. If they're, imagine the number of people that are on Medicare, tens of millions of people. And if in an instant, vision and dental is something that they are now allowed, and Sanders being the one that pushed for it, Sanders being the one that even set the context for that to be included into something like this, he gets a hell of a lot of credit for this. Sanders. Bernie delivers. Like, share, and subscribe.